Right, so my texturing workflow, in short, yeah, sure, it's a 2 hour video, but I'm going to speed it up quite a bit, try and run through it in like 30 minutes or so. Right, so first of all, I normally go and source an appropriate HDRI from HDRI Haven. There's a couple of options there, and it does give you a warning if the stitching or the lens is dirty or anything like that. But most cases you don't really use these as textures, just for lighting information, so you don't really have to worry about you know, it not being perfect. You do want it to be a high dynamic range though. So once you import or download that and import it into Unity, you just need to set it to cube projection. Make sure it matches, or the compression matches, the scale of your texture, and then you can apply it to a cube map. Right, so once it's applied to a cube map material, you have options to adjust the exposure and the rotation of it, and then if you then apply that to your lighting information, you have that HDRI in your scene. Now, depending on your light setup, whether it's being baked or not, and what's static and what's mixed, the HDRI may or may not influence the objects in the world. As you can see, it's definitely influencing the sort of post-processing stack and has some effects on that. I actually opted, I felt like the HDRI was adding too much detail and sort of setting a precedent for realism in the scene, and since everything in here is sort of toon shaded and has a toon outline, I thought the gradient skybox, or procedural skybox, worked better. I just wanted to make it a lot more muted and sort of darker gradient. That's mainly just personal preference. These gradient skyboxes are nice because they don't, you don't require an actual object in the scene. But again, it all depends on whether you're baking this lighting information or not. I posted some links from Unite Now in the class links, so you can go and check out a little bit more on lighting and light baking and light settings in those videos. It's quite a robust and thorough tutorial, and I think anyone that's a game major would definitely need to know those things. So even if you're not using Unity as your final output for rendering this term, at least go through those in any case. Right, so so once the HDRI has been set up, I went back into Blender to have another look at the saxophone. Now this is a lower poly version than the one that I originally downloaded, so I had to go in and I think it was cleaned up using Decimate, so it's quite a rough cleanup. I needed to go back and solve some of the geometry. So that was me adding a solidifier, trying to get that portion of the mesh to be solid again, and instead of just a single polygon. Didn't quite work, so I had to remesh a couple of things. So that is unfortunately one of the things that you need to make sure is in place, your mesh and your UVs, before you can carry on with texturing. So otherwise you have to rebuild all the texture information. It's difficult to work with existing textures on a model. Right, so this carries on for a bit. Yeah, just sort of mirror modifiers, solidify modifiers. What is useful in here is a little bit later on I noticed an issue that may occur during your modeling process as well, and that's sort of these double-sided faces, right? So first of all, I thought, well, the normals are just the wrong way around, so you can just flip the normals around. Remember, this is the normal overlay that you find under your viewport overlays. So yeah, try to see what was up with the topology there, and then eventually realize that yeah, try to merge all the points first. Eventually realized that the planes are actually double-sided, so there were two faces directly on top of each other using the same vertices. So welding the vertices together didn't really have the effect that I wanted. Thought there was something wrong, but eventually figured out, okay, cool, I can just go and select the faces and delete them. Took a while to figure that out, what was going on. I mean, these errors in the mesh may occur during modeling process, but they more often creep in when you're trying to find quick ways to optimize your mesh and simplify it. Then these little things creep in. So yeah, eventually realized I just needed to get rid of the double faces. Alright, carry on from here. Alright, so the normals are still flipped, but with the solidifier modifier on, everything flips. Back again, and then just needed to merge everything into a single model once. I'm happy with that shape. Speed it up some more. Alright, okay, so in here what I did was I did a very quick fix on the UVs, right? So I just did a light map projection. And then yeah, just to get something in place, and then reference the actual mouthpieces, realized that was also problematic. So yeah, I just deleted some bits, extruded other bits, and then welded the whole inside together. So yeah. Okay, main thing being here, like, you have to constantly make sure that all the topology is correct and in place. Okay, so once I did that, I went into vertex painting mode and selected the actual vertices, and then you can, with this vertices selected, you can go up to paint and you can sort of flush that with the color. You could fill it with the color, and you can go and set the contrast and things like that later on. So I've got two vertex color groups here, which I also realized doesn't really work, and you don't really need the dirty vertex colors for Substance. They're useful in Unity, because Substance does its own curvature map. So for this, I did vertex colors for the separate mouthpiece, because that would be a different material or texture. And then just messed with the color palette in case I need to paint any other colors. But I thought these three IDs were sufficient. And yeah, that was the other dirty vertex color that I had in place. I then exported it as an FBX again to take it to Substance. I think only to realize that I needed to at least have that vertex color active, because if it's inactive, it doesn't pick up in any case. Alright, and just navigating to the texture, the model, and made sure that everything was set to 2K. So this is with the light map UV map unwrapping, and even though everything sort of can paint fine, The problem with having as many seams in your um, in your project, um, yeah. So I was just checking whether it responds properly to the light, which it seems to be fine. That's not really where the issue comes in, but when you start baking textures to something with UVs like that, I ended up with a lot of artifacts, right? So this is also where I realized that the the ID maps need to be in place. So there you can see the texture baking on the ambient occlusion with the light map settings tend to create some artifacts. So instead, what I did was just make sure that um, the correct color ID map or vertex color ID map is enabled. So I just called it ID. And then I deleted the UV map so that I can get Substance to automatically unwrap it. So just quickly brought that in again, made sure that everything's 2K, and then you just need to make sure that with your settings, if you're asking Substance to auto unwrap it for you, that you can't use the use UV tile workflow, and then it'll generate the UVs for you. Now these UVs are very strange. Alright, so it sort of took the whole thing and tried to spread that out with one single seam. I managed to get the vertex colors working this time around, so the ID map's actually proper, it's picking up the right vertex group. And then yeah, I just found some plastic, drag that onto the object, and then use the color selection mask as a mask for that particular section. Then realize that the texture settings or texture bake settings for the mesh, or for the vertex groups at least, for the ID map was too low. So I went and, well, I tried to first tweak the settings to see if I could just grade it out. Instead, I just went and I think I was trying a different hue as well, see if I'm going to actually pick up the differences. Then went back just to make sure that everything is nice and crisp in Blender, and rebaked the mesh maps at a higher resolution. So at a higher resolution I was able to get more detail out of that masking, tweak the settings some more, and then yeah, that seemed to work much better. Okay. Then just sort of started layering colors. So I grabbed the brass shader as sort of a base, and that seems to apply to all the right places, and then use the smart material to create some aging. I thought, you know, there are some bronze and brasses, but a copper would work just as well, so I thought like drop a copper on there. Just reorganizing the layers with the right masks, places everything in the right place again, and then added a smart mask to the brass texture that's now on top of my other smart texture. So I just wanted little parts of it to stick through, so I used this dirty mask for that. Then I went into all the properties of the layers, so looked at the brass color, tried to make it a little bit more silvery, so that yeah, or a little less yellow, so it looks like it's sort of worn, and a little bit more shiny on the areas that get touched a lot, and areas that don't enjoy as much attention are sort of darker and tend to fade. So yeah, I just went into the curvature mask there as well. You can also, in your viewport, obviously isolate the different types of materials that you're working with. So in that case, I was looking at the actual curvature, but if you switch it to the mask that you're working on, you can get a much clearer idea of what that mask is actually achieving. So then I graded that mask layer, looking at the different options that the mask itself had, which is normally a combination of a couple of things. You'll see that it's got some micro details in there, but it's using your curvature map, your world space tangents, and your thickness map to be able to allow you those variations in your texture. Right, so this was a fairly easy model to do because it doesn't have a lot of variation in the types of materials that it's made from. So I just wanted to get it a little bit dirtier and a little bit more scuffed. I think I toned down the glossiness in a lot of these materials, so yeah, I just went and made them all a little bit more faded and less shiny, and also kept in mind that the shader that I'm using in Unity is a little bit more toon shaded, so yeah, I knew that I was going to sort of dumb down the specular in any case. Yeah, I guess just checking whether what's doing what on the shader, changing sort of colors, color grading, the specular maps, and yeah, I think I was just carried on tweaking the amount of wear and tear on the actual object. I didn't want it to be too light, so yeah, that was just an ongoing process of tweaking the shaders. Okay. Yeah, not much. Nothing new there. You can also set the types of modes on the masks and things depending on whatever you use to mask it out, but it's using the model information that you baked in the beginning to get that information. Right. So because I auto unwrapped the mesh in Substance, I had to re-export the mesh again, and then I just carried on with the PBR specular glossiness workflow because that's what I had already. That's what I had set up, and then just for interest's sake, I went and exported the ambient occlusion as a grayscale map as well that I can use later on. Just made sure that I'm using the right preset. Everything should be in place. You just need to tell it where to save. So that was the specular glossiness preset, but there was also the specular glossy setting that I had on the initial export. So my workflow was consistent. Then I exported all those textures, but realized that the material name is called TT Checkered 512 by 512 UV Grid. So those, just that was the material name, and it includes the material name in the texture name. So you can just take that out in Substance when you're exporting the textures. You don't have to, absolutely have it in there. Okay, so then I just checked the textures and saw what sort of information was on there. right? So realize that the diffuse is actually entirely black. The height map isn't really adding much to it. So I only really need a few of those textures. All right, so then in Unity, I just made sure that I have a folder set for my textures and for the models. Cool, so then just select the ones that I'm actually going to use. So it's only glossiness and specular that needs to be packed. So same process, just grab the glossiness, copy, paste that into the channels of the specular, save that out as a alpha channel bearing target file. All right. And yeah, then apply that or import that and your ambient occlusion, normal map, and yeah, the height map wasn't doing anything either, so literally just those three. Okay, so back on the model, we need to make sure we import the model with the right UV set. So that was the one that was exported from Substance, but I did realize that I mean, I threw it in there and then realized that the normals that Substance generated are a bit off. So everything looks very smooth and sort of flat. Yeah, just some more cleanup here. Just try to make some sense out of my materials folder. All right, some of them are environment textures. Yeah, so here I was dragging and placing the materials on top of it, then imported the model that I exported from Substance back into Blender. Right, because of the normals. So we actually want we don't want Substance to go and change our normals. This is where I actually renamed the material. I think I misspelled it though. So FBXs create those split normal data sets that you need to get rid of, and then you can go and set the auto smoothing again. So at that smoothing angle, you get sharper edges in places where you actually need it. And then I created another dirty vertex vertex color for it in case I want to use any of that in Unity. Okay, and then just tweak the brightness and contrast so I can get most possible contrast out of that dirty vertex color map. It's basically like a curvature map, but you can use it in Unity and not just in Substance. All right, then save that out as an FBX again, and yeah, continually misspelling saxophone. And then in Unity, just compare the two models again, importing it, not importing the material because I've created a material for it in Unity, and then you can see what the normals are doing. And yeah, if you see them next to each other, you'll clearly see that the one has very smooth normals and the other one has the correct normals, or at least normals that I can manage. So yeah, I didn't see much of an effect with that ambient occlusion map, but then just started dropping the textures on there that I needed. You can see there's a slight difference, mainly in the normals, and because of the one model being selected, and it's got that yellow overlay. normal maps need to be fixed, so that just needs to be checked. And the normal maps don't actually change the geometry normals. Yeah, just make sure that your normals stay intact. You can ask Unity to also calculate the normals, but then again, you're not really in full control of the smoothing angle. Right, so then they looked pretty much the same to me. Just ended up deleting the one that I don't need. And then because I'm using this whole toon shaded effect in this project, and I mean it's just because the character and everything else is toon shaded. I eventually, well, I tried to make this look a little bit more stylized and exaggerated in terms of color with the standard lit shader, but standard shaders always only offer that much, and in some cases you just want a different custom shader. So I have another pack in this project called flat lit shaders that's a collection of toon shaders that I use, that also kind of uses the same maps, or I think I ended up using the specular map as a color map. Yeah, so I think I'm just going to skip ahead to what the sort of more final results look like. Yeah, something goes wrong in this scene where the forward renderer forgets that it needs to render outlines. So I put the outlines back on, and then flat shader back onto the model. And well, because you guys don't really have the shader available, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but just so that you can see that, you know, different shaders yield different results, even if you you know, you can still use the same texture set. So you're still based on that sort of PBR workflow. You still have your grime and dirt, but except now you're able to control the way that the shadows and things fall on this model a lot better. So yeah, I just tried to make it seem a little bit more metallic and a little bit more toony at the same time. Yeah, I think one can then continue to tweak the shaders and, you know, get the look that you want at the end of the day based on the lighting that you have in the scene. Cool. All right, so that's sort of the final look for the saxophone. So yeah, check out the harnessing lights with Universal Render Pipeline. That should give you a really good overview of the use of lights in general in Unity, and what sort of lighting setups you can use to, well, both optimize your performance, but also your appearance of your lights. So they go through all the bounce settings and the render pipeline settings and everything like that. So it's very useful, because most of your lights and things, your camera settings will often refer to saying that it's using HDR or anti-aliasing based on your pipeline settings. Lights often have the same thing where it says it uses the biases, and yeah, so a lot of this actually gets managed by your URP render data, and then you can go and set the settings in here and make sure that the shaders or shadows and things actually appear correctly. One thing that's a little bit off topic, but it's quite exciting, is that if you have the latest versions of both the LTS and Unity 2020 1.2, then you can go and into your preferences and switch your theme editor to professional. So the dark theme is now global, or free. That's quite cool. Happy about that. It does help, like even with lighting and stuff. I mean, it seems like a silly thing, but it does actually help, because it's less contrast in your viewport, and your eyes don't actually. I mean, the user interface doesn't draw as much attention as the actual render. So you actually get a better sense of what color and light usage you have in your scene. All right. So for tomorrow's hand-in, while waiting for the upload, is just the texture sheets and close-up renders. So you can, I don't mind if you do close-ups in your substance viewport. If you want to just make grabs from that, that's fine. If you do it in Unity or Blender or whatever, so it's just textural detail, and then all your actual textures, so whatever you've exported as your texture set, even if it's work in progress, you just want to see that all the shaders are in place. So let's see, props, instruments, textures. So those textures laid out on a PDF, right? So put them all next to each other, or do that overlay thing that I showed you in previous classes, where you sort of combine some of the texture spaces. You do need to say what resolution these textures are, so if they're 2K or 1K or 4K or 256 or whatever. 512. And then do one with a UV overlay as well, so we can see what the UVs actually look like once they're on top of these. Okay, and that's pretty much all you need. That's all embedded in a PDF, so the screen grabs, renders, textures, UVs, all of those in one single PDF. One thing about the texture sheet assignment is that it's combined with so it's for 20 marks because it's combined with cool, thank you. All right. You can embed textures in your blend files by switching on external data automatically pack. I suppose it's just schlepped out the line to unpack all of them again, but all right. What was I saying about texture sheets? Oh, yeah. So it's effectively combining the two, or let me just go back to, there you go. The texture sheet and the detail render. Okay, so it's that entire assignment. Okay, it was due in week 5. We're doing it in week 6 now. Lighting and effects. So the lighting and the shading stuff is present in some of those tutorials. I think I would do tutorials for the shader graph in any case, because they're not standard. In fact, I think I did one, but I could probably do a better one, more appropriate to to the PBR workflow. So I'll do another bit on shader graph, but do check out those other two tutorials. There's about 2 hours worth of content there, and it's very well structured. So look at that first, and then let's deal with sort of case scenarios, like if anyone needs to build a custom shader, like the Toon shader and stuff that I showed. Render pipelines and post-processing has also been covered in some of this. That actually has a little bit more on the render pipeline settings, so overrides and things like that. But yeah, let's check this out and then move from there as a point of departure. And textures. Seems like the textures are there. Okay. All right. There's some cool stuff happening. I think in some cases the normals aren't smooth, so that's it's a little odd. And then some of the dirt doesn't seem to be collecting in the right places. It seems to be more successful on the wood, and this, like, you would find scuff marks on the edges and dirt and grime in the crevices. I'm not sure if these sort of flat areas will have as much of this sort of blotchiness, so maybe tone that down a little bit, because it's if you look at it from a distance, you don't get that that's sort of one thing that's a band, and just it's often the textures just destroy shapes. So try and make sure that the texture doesn't harm the actual build-up of the model, or sort of negate that, if that makes any sense. I can actually see the resolution on this. So yeah, I don't think we'll be that close up, so that's not a big deal, but again, maybe it's just not localized enough. So there's some stretching happening there that you may want to take care of, and the metalness in general is very rough, so you just want to tone that down. That would likely be in your oopsie. Come on, give me another one there. Please. Okay, so it's likely just the strength of your normal map, which I wouldn't. I mean, it's good to see it here, but I wouldn't bother too much with the strength and settings in Blender itself. It's good to check, but you can go and tweak those in Unity. So yeah, I mean, other than those normals, which I think you can. Oops, sorry. Oh, see, that's the thing. That's the geometry data that I was talking about. So even if you say smooth shading here, it doesn't comply. So you have to clear this data and set the smoothing angle, it appears. Let's see. Smooth shade. refuses to do anything. Normally fixes it. I'm just trying to think what other cause for hard edges might be. And there's no amount of auto smoothing, no tweaking of the normals available. That's very smooth. Do not work. So yeah, it's difficult to set those normals for some reason. I'm very curious to see what happens if I just bring it into another scene. Oh, okay. They do actually smooth, but there's not enough. Okay. That's sort of okay, but it's not great. I don't know if Unity is going to give you a better UV result. I mean, mesh smoothing result. Still feels like something's not quite working here. Could it be? Okay. All right. Sorry. I didn't realize that those were all marked as sharp. So yeah, you don't want to do that. So go to edges, clear sharp. All right, so that's why it wasn't taking. Yeah, so then you can go and custom the smoothing angle, which that seems to be a good smoothing angle. All right, so back in here, yeah, clear those sharp edges. And yeah, and then they should handle smoothing a lot better. All right. Yeah, and then I think the rest of it doesn't seem to be any like technical issues. I would just say, yeah, tone down the dirt and this sort of very green looking rust on there. It's a bit excessive. I think you'd find that maybe there's smoother areas because it was touched more or used more. I feel like the overall texture is a little bit too aged. yeah, not enough, or sort of aged across the board, not enough specific um, sort of effects on the handle and things like that. Just think of how a used version of this object would look like, and whether things are actually making sense in terms of that. Like normally, even this like dirt buildup would be a little bit more from bottom up. Like there'd be a vertical gradient from dirty to less dirty normally. And also just look at what your vertex colors. So if we go into vertex colors, that's just in that object now. I suppose that could have also been set to smooth shading. I just realized that there's a lot of things that are still angular. Definitely those things you want to set the smoothing, and you can still do it here. You don't have to go retexture to do that. It's literally just the normal settings, and then if you export it again, make sure that those are all set correctly. Alright, let's see what dirty vertex does there. Right. Yeah, it doesn't seem to do much for the box, but it does do some nice ambience over there. What do you think? Okay, so the wireframe or UV overlay is either showing me the actual UVs on top of the texture, so you can export UVs by going into your UV editor and in edit mode. Well, if everyone is on the same texture, going to edit mode. Okay, well, if they're not on the same texture sheet, then you won't do them all together. You'll do them separately, but you'll just go UV export UV layout. That will then save out this UV file as a transparent layer that you can either overlay on top of your textures. You save that as a PNG and put it on top of your texture in Photoshop, or you can also in Substance, I think under the display settings, you may be able to tell it to show mesh wireframe on top as well. Right, so you can also do that. And then just capture those. It's sort of a work in progress hand-in still, so you can still show things that are that you're busy with. It doesn't have to be too I don't know, formal, because your final version will have this information in it in any case. So I will revisit and I will have a chance to look at it again. This is just so that I can see that everything is on track and that you're sort of generating the textures and everything correctly, and yeah, so that I can jump in and help you out if I see anything's going funny. Cool. Cool. Yeah. So I think for most parts, what I'll do is comment on the actual texturing. So if there aren't any clear technical issues, like normals or UVs or something going funny, then I'll just comment on what the texture work actually looks like and whether the object is still in a good state. We do this very often where we put textures on an object that then eventually sort of causes that object to display differently in from a certain distance. So with this, because of the sheer contrast of these sort of areas, you lose the fact that there's a metal band going around it. Like if you zoom out and all you see is like these dappled dots. So the contrast of your textures is important. And if it gets too contrasting, I mean, it's a very interesting texture, but I think maybe just paint some of that rust out. It doesn't have to be that grimy. And then yeah, look at gradients to, like this one seems to have a bit of a gradient from the bottom up. This wood doesn't seem to have been, or doesn't seem to have aged appropriately, if that makes sense. But I like the base textures, so I do like the grain on the wood and the coloration of the wood and the metals and everything. I think maybe you can do something burnt into this crate as well. It would be cool to see a decal on there. Yeah, and then just see what you can do in terms of gradients so that the fall off of the dirt is appropriate, and maybe get some mud splatter and stuff at the bottom here that you wouldn't necessarily find on the top, just to make it, yeah, again, make it feel like it's not just a texture, but it's actually it's an aging process. Otherwise, what you would need to do is duplicate the entire layer. Export mask as file, cut layers, duplicate layers, and paint on that. Okay, so that's, so for more, I think, specific areas, but you probably want to go and switch these brushes out as well, or maybe paint with an actual texture. But yeah, it's very robust. So yeah, there you can get a stencil of sorts. It's just black and white dots, and sort of paint areas. or mask certain areas. Let's get rid of some specular in some places. I don't know what I'm actually painting there. That seems like a very light version of the brass that I used to have. Yeah, so that's, I mean, now to get rid of some of the stuff, just sort of paint little blotches and layers on top of it. Just use textures. It's a Photoshop exercise really, because it's just constantly adding and refining and eventually just exporting the bunch. I was looking into some third-party renderers as well. These are just Unity assets that allow you to use different shaders and different shader makeups and different render pipelines and things like that, but it's all in Unity. It's worth knowing that there are any or there are things like this. Making piano keys. I used to at some point. I mean, I don't really have that many unique materials that didn't already come with Substance, and then I mean, I would normally go, and the same way that I like reference how many keys there are on a keyboard, I would go and look for textures online, basically use the same resources, because Quixel Megascans used to have an educational version where you could only access like a portion of their library. So I think, what do I have? Tools. I might actually be in mixers, Megascans. Yeah, I guess I do have some. Let's see what this Megascan folder looks like. It's not going to be a tiny upload though. Mixes. Yeah, it's going to be about 15, 20, 20 gigs worth of textures. And again, so that some of it's from Megascan library. So that's from Mixer or Bridge. So local. Right. Okay, I guess there are a few. I don't know if I put this anywhere else already. Let me see, maybe it's online already and I could just share it with you. Let's see, what else do I have? Those are all standard. It's just the Megascan library, but I'm pretty sure that the fact that Unreal made those assets free, that you can go and grab them in any case. Again, bridge. Um, 3D assets unique. So if you're signed in to your Epic account, then I think everything is free in any case. So these are actual models. Oh, those are 3D assets, yeah, so that's not what I want. Collections, bark, asphalt, sure. Yeah, I think you can just go and download any of these then. I don't think there's any restrictions. So it wouldn't make much sense. Even if it doesn't say free, but it's free, you can just download any of them. As long as you're signed into your Unreal account. Oh wait, it takes me to the exact same place. There you go, yeah, so the entire Megascans library is now entirely free for Unreal Engine. Not that that matters. I mean, you can download it, and no, I don't even know which one I downloaded. Called purchased, but yeah, you can purchase as many as you want, and that's a little bit less than a 22 gig upload. But yeah, between those, Texture Haven, Quixel Megascan, Substance Source is less useful because you do only get a few select substances for free, but Substance Share is quite useful because that's the community driven resource, yeah, so you can go check that out.